city is sleeping, or as close to sleeping as Rome ever really gets. It is sometime in the 1st century after the birth of Christ, in the age that later generations will call the early empire. The great monuments already rise above the dark streets, temples and forums, arches and columns, and not far away, the massive outlines of public baths and amphitheaters. But we are not going to those places tonight. We are going down into the quieter parts of the city, into neighborhoods where people live, cook, and work, into streets where the stones are worn smooth by many feet, and where the smell of smoke, oil, and food hangs gently in the air. In these streets, one of the most important kinds of workshop is the bakery, the pistrinum. It is not grand, and it is not elegant. From the outside, it is just another doorway opening onto the street. But for the people who live nearby, this bakery is as essential as water. It is here that the bread of the neighborhood is made. Bread in ancient Rome is not a luxury. It is the basic food of the city. For many people, it is what they eat every single day, often at every meal. Loaves of wheat bread, sometimes mixed with other grains, are broken and dipped into sauces, eaten with olives, cheese, and vegetables, or served with stews and soups. For the poor, bread might be almost all they can afford. For the rich, it is still the backbone of the meal, even if it is surrounded by many other dishes. So, throughout Rome and in other cities of the empire, there are bakeries. Archaeologists have found the remains of dozens of them in the buried cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, where ash and stone sealed them in place in the year 79. In those frozen rooms, we can still see heavy stone mills, kneading benches, and rounded brick ovens, giving us a very clear picture of what a Roman bakery looked like and how it worked. In Latin, the baker is called a pister. The word originally meant someone who ground grain, but over time, it came to mean a professional who turned grain into loaves. Bakers were sometimes freeborn citizens, sometimes freedmen who had once been enslaved, and sometimes owners of enslaved workers themselves. They formed an important trade in the life of the city. So important that wealthy bakers could even afford elaborate tombs decorated with scenes of their craft, like the famous monument of Eurysaces, outside one of Rome's city gates. Wikipedia. Tonight, we are going to spend a full day with just one of these bakers. We will move slowly, gently, from the last deep hours of night, through the first pale light of dawn, and all the way into evening and sleep again. The aim is not to rush or to memorize every detail, but simply to drift through his world and feel, for a little while, the rhythm of life in an ordinary Roman bakery. You can let yourself imagine that you are walking alongside him, or that you are seeing through his eyes, or, if you prefer, that you are a quiet observer in the corner of the room, almost invisible, watching the day unfold. Whatever feels most restful for you is perfectly fine. For our story, we will call him Marcus. Marcus the baker. He is not a famous person. He will not appear in history books or inscriptions. But he is the sort of person on whom the city depends. Right now, Marcus is still asleep. The night is deep and cool. The air above the city is hazy with the faint smoke of many hearths. But the breeze from the nearby Tiber River is fresh enough to keep things from feeling heavy. Marcus is lying on a simple bed, little more than a wooden frame with woven straps, and a mattress stuffed with straw or wool. A thin blanket is pulled up over his shoulders. His breathing is slow and even. Outside, the streets are quiet, except for the occasional distant sound. A cart rattling over stones, a dog barking once, and then falling silent. Perhaps the soft murmur of water flowing in a nearby fountain. The time is very early, long before sunrise. Bakers must begin their day long before their customers awaken. Bread takes time. Time to grind the grain, time to knead the dough, time for it to rise and to bake. So Marcus has learned to live on a different rhythm from many of his neighbors. There is no alarm clock, but Marcus' body knows the hour. Years of repetition have carved a kind of internal clock into his nerves and muscles. At roughly the same time every night, he stirs awake. His eyes open slowly in the dimness. The household around him is small. Perhaps he lives in a modest apartment above or behind the bakery, sharing the space with family and a couple of workers. He moves carefully so as not to disturb anyone unnecessarily. There is a soft creak from the wooden frame of the bed as he sits up, and the rustle of blanket as he folds it back. He dresses in simple clothing, a tunic of undyed wool or linen, perhaps belted at the waist, and sturdy sandals, good for standing for many hours on a hard floor. His hands already bear the signs of his trade, the roughened skin of fingers and palms, a fine dusting of flour that seems to linger no matter how often he washes. In the dark, he lights a small oil lamp, cupping his hand around the flame to coax it into life. The gentle yellow light spills out, catching the rough texture of the walls and the edges of a wooden table, glinting briefly off a small bronze vessel in the corner. Shadows stretch long and soft. He takes a moment, perhaps, for a very simple prayer, murmured in low Latin. A few words to the household gods, the Lares and Penates, asking for a good day's work, for steady hands, for enough bread to feed the neighborhood. The little shrine in the corner, with its painted images and small offerings, watches over him. Marcus steps out into the corridor and down the stairs, lamp in hand, moving toward the bakery. The air grows cooler as he descends. The smell changes too. Up in the living space, it was mostly the faint scent of sleep and cloth and oil. Down here, as he nears the bakery, another smell takes over, the earthy aroma of grain and flour, the faint sour tang of fermenting dough, and the dry, slightly smoky scent of the oven and hearth. He pushes open the bakery door. The pistrinum is dark, but not entirely. Even without lamps, there is a memory of light here, in the pale surfaces of flour-dusted tables and the curved shapes of the stone mills. Marcus places his lamp on a convenient ledge, and the room comes alive in a gentle glow. The bakery is arranged in a way that archaeologists, centuries from now, will recognize from excavated bakeries in Pompeii and Herculaneum. Heavy stone mill bases stand like squat, frozen figures in one part of the room, with their hourglass-shaped upper stones still and silent. Nearby, long wooden kneading tables wait, their surfaces worn smooth by countless loaves, shaped and reshaped. Against one wall, shelves hold sacks of grain, jars of oil and honey, baskets, and tools. And at the heart of the bakery, a rounded brick oven sits like a sleeping animal, its mouth closed and black. Ashes from the previous day still faintly visible inside. Marcus breathes in slowly. For him, This is home as much as any bedroom. The bakery is where he spends most of his waking hours. It is where he feels most capable, most himself. The first task is the fire. He goes to the oven and kneels, setting his lamp aside for a moment. Carefully, he begins to arrange fuel, pieces of wood, maybe some dry brush or chips of waste wood from nearby carpenters, things that catch quickly and burn hot. Roman bakers used large masonry ovens, heating them by building a fire inside until the bricks themselves held the heat, then raking out the embers and baking the bread in the residual warmth. There is a rhythm to this work too. Marcus knows exactly how much wood he needs on a day like this, in this season, to reach the right temperature. He can tell by the color of the bricks, by the feel of the air near the oven mouth, by experience rather than instruments. He lights the kindling with a glowing fragment from the lamp, then gently feeds the fire until it begins to crackle softly. The orange light of the flames dances inside the oven, licking the curved ceiling, casting shadows that move like water. While the oven warms, his next concern is the dough. In one corner of the bakery, he keeps his most precious tool, the starter. Ancient Roman bread was often made with sourdough leaven, a living culture of wild yeasts and bacteria that, when fed with flour and water, grows active and bubbly. This starter might be something Marcus inherited from his teacher, or something he has nurtured for many years, feeding it daily, keeping it alive through hot summers and cold winters. Wikipedia. He takes down a covered jar, opens it, and leans in. The smell is pleasantly sour, alive. Tiny bubbles mark the surface. He stirs it gently with a wooden spoon, then sets about refreshing it, adding fresh flour and water, mixing until it has the right consistency. Some of this lively, renewed starter will go into the day's dough. The rest will be kept safely aside for tomorrow and the day after that, and the day after that, like a quiet thread of continuity running through his life. The grain is next. Marcus stores bags of grain in a relatively dry, cool part of the room, trying to keep insects and damp away. The grain might be wheat, perhaps a common Roman variety, or a mix, including other cereals. The finest, purest wheat is expensive and produces white bread favored by the wealthy. Darker, more mixed bread is more affordable and more common for ordinary people. Wikipedia. He measures out what he will need, gauging the day's demand from habit and from the memory of previous mornings. Too little, and he will have disappointed customers. Too much, and the bread might sit unsold, becoming stale and losing value. Over the years, he has gotten better at this. The grain, for now, is still whole. To become flour, it must pass through the mills. In the dim, steady light of the lamps and the growing glow from the oven fire, Marcus moves towards the millstones. These are heavy installations, each consisting of a solid circular base and an upper stone that fits over it. The lower stone, the meta, is shaped like a low cone or a truncated pyramid. The upper stone, the catalyst, is hollowed out inside so that it sits over the meta, forming a narrow gap between them. Grain is poured into the top and crushed between the stones as the upper piece turns. Turning the catalyst is hard work. It can be done with animal power, with donkeys or mules harnessed to horizontal beams, circling patiently around and around. In smaller bakeries, it may be done by people, workers pushing the beams with their shoulders and hands, walking in a slow, endless circle. Marcus may not do this part personally every day. Perhaps he has a helper, a young man with strong shoulders, or an enslaved worker assigned to this labor. However the work is arranged, the sound of the mill is a constant presence in the bakery. He pours grain carefully into the top opening of the mill, listening for the soft hiss as it slides down. When everything is ready, the upper stone begins to move. There is a low grinding noise, deep and steady rather than harsh, as the millstones begin to crush the grains. The person pushing the beam leans into it with their body weight, taking one slow step after another, following the circular path worn into the floor. You can imagine the rhythm of it. Step, push, breath in, breath out. The sound is hypnotic. Stone against stone, grain against rough surface. The faint rustle as flour begins to fall, collecting at the bottom. In one of the preserved bakeries in Herculaneum, archaeologists found exactly such mills, frozen in place. They could see how many were set up in a single room, how they were arranged, and how the floor was worn by the paths of humans or animals that turned them. In our bakery in Rome, Marcus checks the fineness of the flour from time to time with his fingertips. Too coarse, and the bread will be heavy and rough. Too fine, and the work may be wasted on customers who cannot pay for luxury. So he aims for a balance. As the mills turn, flour slowly accumulates in wooden bins or on cloth-lined surfaces. The air fills with a fine dust that settles on everything, softening edges and muting colors. If you breathe in, you can almost taste it. Dry, slightly nutty, the smell of fields transformed into food. While this work goes on, Marcus moves between tasks, efficient but unhurried. He checks the oven fire, adding more fuel as needed. He glances at the starter, noting how it responds to the fresh flour and water. He may prepare the kneading tables, wiping them down, sprinkling a little flour to keep the dough from sticking. Sometimes, at this early hour, he might speak quietly with his workers. There could be a brief exchange of greetings, a comment about the weather, a mention of some news from the neighborhood. But mostly, the bakery is filled with the simple sounds of work. Footsteps, grinding stone, crackling fire. You can imagine yourself standing against the wall, back resting lightly against cool brick, watching as the flour bins slowly fill. There is, in this repetitive labor, a certain calm. The same movements, day after day. The same tasks, done in the same order. At first glance, it might seem dull, but for someone trying to drift into sleep, its predictability can feel like a lullaby. Eventually, the grain that was measured out becomes enough flour. The mills slow and stop. The worker wipes sweat from their brow, perhaps smears a streak of flour across their face without noticing. The room is quiet again, except for the steady breathing of the fire. It is time to make the dough. Marcus begins by mixing water and flour in a large, sturdy basin, perhaps made of wood or clay. He adds a portion of the refreshed sourdough starter, its living yeasts ready to begin their slow, invisible work. There's no exact measurement with cups and scales in the modern sense. Instead, there is experience, knowing by feel how much water will make a dough that is firm enough to hold its shape, but soft enough to rise well. He pours water carefully from a jug, watching how the flour absorbs it, then stirs with a wooden paddle until the mixture begins to come together. At this point, he plunges his hands into the dough, and the mixing becomes kneading. Kneading is another kind of rhythm. Push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. The heels of his hands press into the dough, stretching the gluten strands, developing the structure that will hold the gas formed by the fermenting starter. The dough resists at first, then becomes smoother, more elastic. The surface of the kneading table is dusted with flour, and a thin veil of it rises each time the dough is turned. You can imagine the sensation in his hands, the stickiness gradually giving way to a supple, living mass. Warmth from his skin slowly passing into the dough. The quiet satisfaction of seeing an amorphous mixture become something coherent and strong. If he is making several types of bread, he may divide the basic dough into portions now and enrich some with oil, herbs, or honey. Roman recipes mention bread flavored with things like fennel, poppy seeds, or even cheese. Some loaves are simple, meant for everyday sustenance. Others are more special, perhaps destined for wealthier customers or for offerings at shrines. What interests us here in this quiet bakery is the most iconic Roman loaf, the panis quadratus. Archaeologists studying the carbonized loaves found in Pompeii and Herculaneum have identified this distinctive form. It is usually round, but the top is marked by radial indentations, like slices of a pie, often 8 in total. Sometimes a cord or string was tied around the loaf before baking, leaving a groove around the side. Marcus divides his kneaded dough into chunks of roughly equal weight, lifting each one and shaping it into a rough ball. On the table, he rolls and tucks, creating tension on the surface of each loaf so that it will rise neatly rather than spreading flat. One by one, the loaves take shape. He arranges them on wooden boards or directly on the floured table. With a practiced hand, he presses or cuts shallow lines into the top, first across, then perhaps further lines, dividing the loaf into segments. These marks are not only decorative, they make it easier to break the baked bread into portions, to share or sell by the piece. In some bakeries, there is evidence that loaves were stamped with marks indicating the maker, the owner, or the weight. The famous Herculaneum loaf bears a stamp showing that it was made by a slave of a particular household. Our Marcus may have his own stamp, a small carved tool that he presses into the dough to identify his bread in crowded markets and ovens. As he works, the room gradually grows lighter. Outside, the sky is shifting subtly from deep black to a faint bluish gray. Birds are beginning to stir. Somewhere, a rooster calls. Inside the bakery, the lamps still burn, but their light now mingles with the first hints of dawn. The shaped loaves rest for a short while, allowing the sourdough to start its work. They swell just a little, softening, becoming less dense. Marcus watches them with a trained eye, though to an outsider, the changes might seem minimal. Meanwhile, he returns to the oven. The fire has been burning for some time now. The bricks are hot. The inside of the oven glows faintly, the wood reduced to a bed of embers. Marcus judges that it is nearly ready. Using a long-handled tool, he rakes out most of the burning material, leaving a clean, hot floor inside. Some bakers may leave a little fire at the back or sides, others clear it completely. There is no thermometer. He relies on the color of the interior, the way the heat feels against his face and hands, and perhaps a few traditional tricks, like tossing in a pinch of flour and watching how quickly it browns. When he is satisfied, he retrieves his first board of loaves. Each loaf is gently slid off the board and onto the oven floor using a broad, flat wooden paddle. The Roman baker's peel moves smoothly in and out, carrying dough into the glowing mouth of the oven. Marcus works quickly, but without haste, placing the loaves in organized rows so that he can retrieve them efficiently later. As the oven fills, the bakery begins to smell different. The raw scent of flour and fermenting dough is joined, and then overtaken by the warm, comforting aroma of baking bread. It is a smell that has hardly changed in 2,000 years. Anyone who has ever walked past a bakery in the early morning would recognize it instantly. While the first batch bakes, Marcus cleans up the kneading table, perhaps begins a second batch of dough, or checks other preparations. Maybe he has special orders for small rolls, or for flatbreads to be cooked on a heated stone or metal plate, more like modern focaccia. Ancient Roman sources mention simple flatbreads baked under tiles testum, or in portable ovens clibinus, as well as more elaborate loaves made in large, fixed furnaces. The routine continues. The day is still only beginning. By the time the first batch of loaves has been in the oven for a little while, the darkness outside the bakery has begun to lift. The sky above Rome is still soft and dim, but the very first hints of color are appearing along the eastern horizon. Somewhere beyond the maze of streets and rooftops, the sun is preparing to rise. But down here, at ground level, the lamps inside the bakery still glow warmly, and the oven is the brightest thing in the room. Marcus stands near the open mouth of the oven, the heat washing over his face and chest. It is not yet the full blast that it will become later in the morning, but already he can feel the familiar, comforting intensity of it. The bricks inside radiate warmth, their surfaces a muted reddish brown. The air shimmers slightly just beyond the opening. He has an instinct for this heat. Years of practice have taught him how far to stand, how long to leave his hands near the opening, how the warmth should feel on his skin for the bread to bake perfectly. You can imagine him taking a slow breath, eyes half closed, simply sensing. Then, gently, he takes up the long-handled wooden peel again and slides it into the oven. One by one, he checks the loaves. They are changing. What went into the oven as pale, rounded masses of dough is now transforming into bread. The surfaces are firming. The cuts he made earlier in the dough are opening like petals on a flower, and the crust is taking on the first hints of golden color. The smell, too, has deepened. What began as the sharp, sour aroma of fermenting dough has become something rounder, richer, and more generous. The scent of warm, fresh bread. It drifts out of the oven and fills the bakery, seeping into every surface, every crack, and bumping up gently against the scented smoke of the fatting fire. If you like, you can take a long, slow breath yourself and pretend that you can smell it too, just letting that warmth and comfort float through your imagination. Marcus has customers who depend on this bread each morning. Some will arrive in person, knocking on the bakery door as soon as they see a light inside or hear the first sounds of movement. Others will send servants or enslaved workers with baskets, ordering a certain number of loaves for their households. But before anyone arrives, the bread must be baked just right. He turns some of the loaves slightly, adjusting their positions in the oven so that the heat reaches them evenly. There are no rotating racks here, no knobs to adjust, only his experience and his attentiveness. Another small stretch of time passes, Not long, just enough for the color of the loaves to deepen and the crust to firm. Outside, the pale gray of dawn has become more definite. The sounds of the city are beginning. A cart rolling past, a distant shout, a voice calling to another in greeting. Somewhere, a door slams. Somewhere else, a dog answers with a bark. In the bakery, Marcus judges that the first batch is ready. He moves smoothly, almost gracefully, sliding the peel beneath each loaf and lifting it from the hot floor of the oven. One after another, they emerge into the cooler air, steaming gently, their crusts crackling softly as they adjust to the change in temperature. He sets them on wooden boards to cool, arranging them neatly in rows. The round loaves with their scored tops look almost like a field of small, divided suns. For a moment, he simply looks at them. There is pride in this work, even if he rarely speaks of it. To others, he might shrug and say it is just bread, just his trade. But there is a quiet satisfaction in bringing something so essential into the world each day, in knowing that these loaves will be broken at tables all over the neighborhood, that children will tear them apart with eager hands, that people will dip them into oil and wine and stew. While the first batch cools, he returns to the dough that is rising for the second. The ovens of Rome do not rest. Once they are hot, they are used as efficiently as possible. He shapes more loaves, smaller rolls, and perhaps a few flatbreads, laying them out in their turn. As he works, the first knock comes at the door. It is not a loud knock, just a quick, hopeful tapping at the wooden frame. Marcus glances up and calls out a greeting. A moment later, he steps to the door and pulls it open. Outside stands a young woman with a wicker basket on her arm. Her hair is pinned up simply, and she wears a plain tunic. She looks a little sleepy, as if she has been up not much longer than the baker himself. "Good morning, Marcus," she says softly. He nods in reply, a small smile at the corner of his mouth. She has come from a nearby household, sent by her mistress or master, or perhaps by her own family, to fetch bread for the day. The smell that pours out of the bakery as the door opens makes her eyes brighten. "Is the bread ready?" she asks. "Just now," Marcus answers. "You're in good time." He turns back to the cooling boards and chooses several loaves, weighing them by feel, by habit. He knows roughly what size each household expects, how many mouths they must feed. The loaves are still warm, and he moves carefully, not wanting to crush the crust. He sets them into her basket, and she covers them with a cloth to keep the heat and the scent inside. There might be a short exchange about the cost. Perhaps this family has an account with the bakery, paying once a week or once a month. Perhaps she leaves a small stack of bronze coins on the table, their surfaces worn from many hands. But the details are easy, almost automatic. Soon her basket is full, and she offers Marcus a quick word of thanks before disappearing back into the brightening street. She is the first customer of the day, but she will not be the last. As the city wakes, the pace of visitors slowly increases. A boy arrives next, barefoot and eager, sent by a tavern owner to pick up loaves to go with wine and cheap stew for working men. Then an older man, stooped but still strong, carrying his own basket and chatting genially about the weather as he waits for his usual bread. Sometimes, an enslaved worker comes from a wealthier household, wearing better quality clothing, but with eyes that are cautious and careful. He or she might present a wooden tablet with a written order, indicating the number and type of loaves required. Marcus responds to each in turn, his movements steady and calm. He never seems rushed, even if the requests come close together. The rhythm of his day is so ingrained that he can handle multiple tasks at once. Checking the next batch in the oven, shaping more dough, collecting payment, and offering a greeting, all woven together into one continuous flow. The bakery grows brighter as the sun finally clears the tops of the buildings. Light spills through the doorway each time it opens, illuminating dust motes that dance lazily in the air, little fragments of flour and ash, made beautiful by the morning. If you were standing in the corner of this bakery, watching all of this, you might feel your own breathing slow. The constant cycle of work, the predictable sequence of tasks, the repetitive gestures of kneading and turning and lifting, it all has a lulling effect. Nothing dramatic happens here. No battles, no grand speeches, no sweeping changes in history, just bread every day. And somehow, that is exactly what makes it soothing. As the morning wears on, the oven continues to yield batch after batch. Some loaves are slightly darker, baked for customers who prefer a stronger crust. Some are smaller, convenient for those who eat on the move. A few might be enriched with oil or sprinkled with herbs, special orders for particular clients. There might even be a few sweet rolls, made with a little honey mixed into the dough, saved for children, or for those who can afford a small luxury. Marcus moves among them all, hands sure and confident, as the bakery hums gently with quiet activity. Eventually, the rush of early morning customers begins to fade. Most of the households in the neighborhood have collected their bread by now. The taverns and food stalls that rely on Marcus have stocked their counters with loaves. The baskets that left the bakery in the arms of servants and workers will be arriving at their destinations, ready to be sliced and shared. Inside the bakery, the heat from the oven is still intense, but the sense of urgency has softened. Marcus leans against a table for a moment, wiping his forehead with the back of his flour-dusted arm. His tunic clings to his skin slightly from the warmth and exertion. He is not young, but he is still strong, his body shaped by years of this particular labor. There is still work to be done, but he can allow himself a slower pace now. Some of the remaining loaves will not be picked up. They will be delivered. Marcus, or one of his helpers, begins to arrange these loaves in large wicker baskets. The baskets are lined with cloths to keep the bread clean and, as much as possible, warm. They are marked or mentally noted according to destination. One for the small tavern at the corner of a busy intersection, another for a nearby bath complex where visitors will enjoy bread with cheese and wine, another for a household that regularly orders bread for its staff. One of his younger workers, perhaps a teenage boy with quick eyes and quick feet, hoists a basket onto his shoulder. It is heavy, but he balances it with practiced ease. Marcus offers a few simple instructions, reminders of which customers expect what, and the boy nods, already familiar with the route. You can picture him stepping out of the bakery into the glaring daylight of a Roman late morning. The sky is bright now, and the streets are filled with people. He threads his way through them carefully, calling out a greeting to those he knows, making sure not to jostle the precious cargo on his shoulder. As he walks, you can see the city more clearly. Tall, narrow apartment buildings, insulae rise on either side of the street. Their upper stories leaning slightly inward, laundry hanging from windows, voices drifting down.
Small shops and workshops open onto the ground floor. A cobbler bent over a sandal, a metalworker hammering at a piece of bronze, a wine cellar drawing liquid from a large clay amphora. The smell of Marcus's bread mixes with many others. The tang of fish from a nearby stall, the smoky aroma of grilled meat, the sharp scent of garum, the famous fish sauce. There is also the more neutral, ever-present smell of people and animals and dust. Our delivery boy stops at a tavern first. The doorway is open, revealing a counter with dolia, large pots, set into it, containing cheap wine and stews. Several men sit on stools, already drinking and talking despite the early hour. The tavern keeper, a stout woman with shrewd eyes, looks up as he enters, and a smile creases her face. "Ah, there you are," she says. "I was wondering when the bread would come. My customers are hungry." The boy sets the basket down and begins to unload the loaves, counting them out as he goes. The tavern keeper checks the number against her memory of what she ordered, nods, and hands over a small pouch of coins or a written marker for credit. With one destination complete, the boy lifts the basket again, lighter now, and continues on. Meanwhile, back at the bakery, Marcus takes advantage of the quieter period. He might eat a simple meal, a piece of bread, perhaps slightly imperfect and not suitable for sale, some olives, maybe a bit of cheese or dried fruit. He sits on a low stool or a bench, chewing slowly, finally allowing himself to feel a little of the tiredness that has been growing since he woke in the darkest part of the night. The bakery is still warm, but it feels different at midday. The frenzy of early morning orders has passed, leaving a more spacious calm in its wake. The oven, though still hot, is no longer being fed with new batches as quickly. The mills, silent now that the day's grain has been ground, sit in the shadows like resting animals. Marcus listens to the faint sounds filtering in from outside. Street vendors calling out their wares, wheels rattling over stones, distant laughter. The world is busy, but in here, for the moment, he can breathe. He might chat quietly with a worker or with a family member who has come down from the living quarters above. Perhaps they talk about small things, a neighbor's news, a rumor about a festival that will be held in a few days, a mention of someone's relative serving in the army far away. Even in this calm, Marcus's mind does not entirely leave his work. He keeps an eye on the remaining loaves, making sure none are baking too long or cooling too fast. He adjusts the angle of a board, shifts a basket slightly out of the direct path of the oven's heat. These are small movements, almost unconscious, but they are part of what makes him good at what he does. After eating, he might take a short walk just outside the bakery door, stretching his legs, looking up at the sky for a moment. The sun is high now, and the light is strong. It reflects off the light-colored stones of the buildings, making the street seem almost bright enough to hurt the eyes. People move past in steady streams. Women carrying jugs of water or baskets of food, men in tunics of various colors, children darting between adults, playing games or running errands. Some of them glance toward the bakery as they pass. They know Marcus. They see him every day. A few offer a nod or a wave. He returns these gestures with quiet acknowledgement. For all that Rome is the great capital of an enormous empire, filled with monuments and faced with constant change. Life here at the neighborhood level follows familiar patterns. Bread must be made. Bread must be eaten. And so, after a brief stretch, Marcus returns inside. There may be another, smaller round of baking to attend to. Some customers will come later in the afternoon, wanting fresher bread for the evening meal. He might prepare a few special items. Small round loaves for children, flatter breads that can be topped with herbs and oil, perhaps a few sweetened pastries for a nearby shrine's offerings. As the day edges toward afternoon, the intense heat in the bakery begins to lessen little by little. The oven, no longer being stoked as fiercely, slowly releases its stored warmth. The thick walls of the bakery hold onto the heat, but the air is not quite as overwhelming as it was in the early hours. Marcus moves more slowly now, not out of laziness, but out of the natural rhythm of the day. His most exhausting work is behind him, though there are still important tasks to complete. You might notice, if you were watching carefully, the way his shoulders relax slightly as the light in the bakery shifts from the white brightness of noon toward the softer tones of afternoon. As afternoon settles in, the streets of Rome go through another subtle transformation. The harshest heat of the midday sun begins to soften. Shadows grow a little longer. People who sheltered indoors during the hottest hours start to emerge again. There is a sense of gentle renewal in the air, a second wind for the day. In the bakery, Marcus prepares a modest second round of baking. The demand is not as heavy as in the morning, but there are still customers who will want bread later in the day. Families who plan their main meal in the evening, workers whose schedules bring them home late, and those who simply prefer their bread as fresh as possible. He shapes these afternoon loaves with the same care as the morning ones, though he may not make as many. The dough, which has rested and risen, is pliant under his hands. He rolls, tucks, and marks each loaf, then slides them into the oven. By now, he has a very good sense of how the oven is behaving. Its heat has changed since early morning. It is lower, gentler. This is perfectly suited for certain types of bread and for smaller items. And this is where the sweet treats come in. Not every Roman could afford sweetened baked goods, but there were certainly those who could, and who enjoyed them. Honey was the primary sweetener, sometimes used sparingly in doughs or brushed onto the surface of breads after baking. Dried fruits like raisins or figs could be folded into special loaves. Marcus may have a small batch of such treats planned. A handful of honey rolls destined for a household that likes to spoil its children, or a slightly richer loaf infused with oil and sprinkled with seeds for a customer with a little more coin. The smell in the bakery takes on a new nuance as these items bake. Alongside the familiar aroma of plain bread, there is now the faint floral sweetness of honey, the deeper, fruity scent of baking figs or raisins, the gentle perfume of herbs toasted by the heat. It is almost like a soft echo of the morning rush, a quieter, more refined version. Customers come and go in a lazy trickle. An older woman arrives with a small basket, exchanging a few friendly words with Marcus as she chooses a loaf for her evening stew. A young man, perhaps on his way back from some errand, stops in to buy a small roll to eat as he walks. There is time for conversation now, in a way that was not possible earlier. Marcus might lean against the counter for a moment and listen as someone tells him about a neighbor's new baby, or about a dispute between shopkeepers down the street. He absorbs this news with a mixture of mild interest and calm detachment. His world is bounded largely by flour, fire, and dough, but he is still part of a community, still woven into a web of small human stories. In between these interactions, he tidies. He wipes down the kneading tables more thoroughly, sweeping accumulated flour into a bin, keeping only what can still be used. He checks the sacks of grain, noting how much remains and mentally calculating when he will need to purchase more. He makes sure his tools are in their proper places, peels leaned neatly against the wall, baskets stacked, jars and pots aligned on their shelves. As the afternoon stretches on, the sun outside begins its descent. Through the open doorway of the bakery, the light grows warmer and more golden. You can almost see the dust motes again, now glowing like tiny sparks as they drift on the air. The last loaves of the day come out of the oven. They are placed on the boards to cool, though many will leave the bakery still warm, tucked under arms or balanced in baskets. Marcus knows which customers prefer to arrive later, and when he sees familiar faces appear in the doorway, he is ready with the bread he knows they favor. Slowly, inevitably, the flow of people lessens again. Evening is approaching. People are heading home, gathering with family or friends. Fires are being lit in hearths all over the neighborhood. Pots are set to boil, pans to simmer. Bread, Marcus's bread, will soon be cut and dipped and torn at tables across this little part of Rome. Inside the bakery, it is time to begin closing. Marcus banks the last embers in the oven, letting the fire die down in an orderly way. The bricks will retain some warmth into the night, but by morning they will be cool enough to need rekindling. He brushes the oven floor, clearing it of any remaining crumbs or ash. The tools used to tend the fire are set aside, their metal tips darkened from use. The mills, which have stood silent since morning, receive a last glance. He checks that no grain remains where it might attract pests, that the bins are covered, that the stones themselves are free of debris. The kneading tables are given a final cleaning. Marcus might use a slightly damp cloth to gather the last thin film of flour, then dry the surfaces carefully. Clean tables greet a baker at the start of the next day. It is a small courtesy he pays to his future self. The floor is swept, sending up one last faint cloud of flour dust that settles quickly again. In one corner, the jar containing the sourdough starter is checked and fed once more if needed. Marcus treats it almost like a living companion. He knows that, in a way, it is a colony of yeasts and bacteria that must be nourished and kept in balance. He stirs it gently, watching the bubbles rise, and then seals it for the night, placing it somewhere safe from drafts and extremes of temperature. A few unsold loaves remain on the boards. Some will keep well enough until morning, to be sold at a discount to customers who do not mind day-old bread. Others Marcus may give away to those in need. A neighbor who is struggling, an elderly person with little family support, a passing beggar who knows that this bakery sometimes offers a crust or two at the end of the day. There is a quiet generosity in these gestures, woven into the fabric of his routine. At last, the main work of the day is finished. The light inside the bakery has changed again. The sun outside is dipping low, and the glow through the doorway is now tinged with orange and red. Shadows grow long, meeting in the corners of the room. Marcus takes one more slow look around, making sure everything is in order. Then, with a small nod to himself, he steps to the door. He stands there for a moment, looking out at the street. The city at evening has its own character. The frantic energy of daytime is easing. People move a little more slowly. The air, perhaps, is a touch cooler. Lamps are being lit in windows, their tiny flames blinking into existence one by one as the daylight fades. He draws in a deep breath of the outside air, tinged now with the smells of many cooking fires and evening meals. Then he closes the bakery door. With the bakery closed for the day, Marcus's world narrows for a little while. He leaves behind the mills and the oven, the sacks of grain and the stacks of baskets, and returns to the living space above or behind the shop. The stairs creak softly under his feet. The air grows slightly cooler as he ascends, moving away from the heat stored in the masonry of the oven and into the simpler warmth of home. In the small rooms where he and perhaps his family live, an oil lamp has already been lit. Its light is gentler than the bright, practical glow of the bakery lamps. It flickers softly, casting shadows that move lazily across the walls. Marcus may share this space with a wife, children, or other relatives. Perhaps there is a modest table where a simple meal is laid out. Some of his own bread, of course, alongside olives, a bit of cheese, maybe a dish of lentils or a small piece of salted fish. They eat together, talking quietly about the day. Someone asks how the morning went, and Marcus shrugs in his familiar way. Much the same as always, he might say. The tavern keeper sent for a few extra loaves. The family across the street is expecting visitors, so they ordered more than usual. There is comfort in that sameness, in the way his work repeats. It means that, for now, nothing catastrophic has happened. No grain shortage, no serious disruption to the flow of food into the city. Bread continues to be made and eaten. After the meal, there may be small household tasks to attend to. Mending a piece of clothing, checking on a child's schoolwork, sharing news heard from customers throughout the day. Marcus might sit near the lamp and let his body fully register its fatigue. His arms and shoulders are heavy from kneading and lifting. His legs feel the weight of many hours spent standing and moving from mill to oven to table and back again. There is flour under his fingernails that will never entirely scrub away. There are fine, permanent lines in the skin of his hands, etched there by years of contact with dough and stone and wood. Yet it is a good kind of tiredness, earned, honest, and familiar. As the evening deepens, the noises of the city change once more. From his window, Marcus might hear the lingering sounds of people finishing their own dinners, laughter, raised voices, the clink of dishes. Somewhere, a dog barks again. A cart rattles past, perhaps carrying goods that arrived late. The call of a street vendor, selling some last items before nightfall, floats up and then fades. Gradually, those sounds become fewer and softer. Rome never falls completely silent, but it comes closer at night. The great city slumbers in its own way, its crowded buildings sheltering thousands upon thousands of sleeping souls. Marcus prepares for bed. He washes as best he can, perhaps with water from a basin, wiping away the worst of the flour and sweat. He changes into a cleaner tunic. He might offer another small prayer at the household shrine, thanking the gods for a day without accidents, for an oven that behaved well, for enough bread to satisfy his customers. When he finally lies down on his bed, the familiar mattress supporting his weight, he feels his body sink gratefully into stillness. The room is dim now, lit only by the last faint glow of the lamp. Shadows are deep and gentle. The air is cooler than it was in the bakery, and he draws his blanket up around his shoulders, tucking it under his chin. His mind wanders for a little while. He might think of the loaves he baked today, imagining them now as they sit on tables across the neighborhood. In a modest apartment a few streets away, a family of 5 is finishing their meal, wiping their bowls with crusts of his bread. In a slightly grander house, servants clear plates where his loaves have been served alongside stews and roasted vegetables. In a tavern, men raise cups of wine, pieces of his bread soaking in the liquid before being eaten. All of those small moments, scattered through the city, are connected by the work he did in the quiet, dark hours before dawn. He might think, too, of tomorrow. It will look very much like today. Again, he will wake in the deep night. Again, he will light a lamp and descend the stairs to the bakery. Again, he will kindle the oven, check the starter, measure the grain. The mills will turn, the dough will be kneaded, the loaves shaped and baked. There is something almost circular about his life, like the round loaves he makes. For some, that might feel confining. For Marcus, it is simply the shape of his world, a rhythm he has accepted and made his own. And beyond him, beyond his little bakery and his modest household, the city of Rome continues as well. Far above his neighborhood, the grand forums and temples stand in the moonlight. Statues of emperors and gods look out over empty paving stones. The Senate House, the basilicas, the arches of triumph, all the great monuments are still there, their stones cool and silent. In the distance, the Tiber River flows steadily, reflecting the faint light of stars. Somewhere out beyond the city walls, in the countryside, fields of grain grow in the dark, nourished by dew. Those fields, tended by unseen hands, will supply the grain that Marcus and other bakers will grind into flour, continuing the chain that connects earth to oven to table. It is a vast, interconnected system, but Marcus thinks of it only in passing. Mostly, he simply trusts that the grain will keep coming, that his supplier will have sacks ready when he needs them, that the mills will keep turning. His eyes grow heavy. If you like, you can imagine lying down beside him in that quiet room, not in a literal sense, but in the sense of letting your mind share in his rest. You have followed him through his day, waking in darkness, lighting the oven, grinding the grain, kneading the dough, shaping the loaves, tending the fire, greeting customers, making deliveries, resting at midday, baking again in the afternoon, and finally closing the shop and returning home. You have moved with him through the rhythms of an ancient Roman day, feeling the city wake and work and settle. Now, as he drifts towards sleep, you can allow yourself to do the same. His breathing slows, becoming deep and regular. The lamp is extinguished or allowed to burn down to nothing. The room becomes completely dark. Somewhere below in the bakery, the